Story 1. The Shadow That Found a New Master. Mystical/supernatural interpretation. Slow burn, cinematic, 10K plus characters. I first noticed something wrong with my shadow on a Tuesday night. One of those evenings where the air feels thick, as if the world is holding its breath. I had just stepped out of the shower, tired and unfocused, when I saw it standing on the bathroom tiles below me. At first glance, it looked normal. The outline was right, the proportions were right, everything obeyed the light above. But when I lifted my arm to dry my hair with the towel, my shadow did not lift its arm. It stood completely still. I remember freezing mid-motion, unsure if it was just exhaustion messing with me. I lowered my arm. The shadow finally moved, but it was delayed, as if reacting a second too late. I should have been more scared in that moment. But I wasn't. I told myself it was just flickering light. Old bulbs. Wet eyes. Anything logical. But the next night, things escalated. The delay became separation. I was brushing my teeth, leaning slightly to the side, when I noticed my shadow lean more than I did. Exaggerated. Twisted. As if it wasn't reflecting my posture but trying to mimic it, stretch it, adapt it. I tested it. I raised my left arm. The shadow raised its right. Then it lowered its arm before I did. Like it was impatient. I stumbled backward, knocking the toothbrush into the sink. My breath became sharp, cold. My own shadow was no longer mine. That night I slept with the lights on. The first time it looked away. 3 days later, I was in the kitchen, pouring water into a glass, when something impossible happened. My shadow turned its head. Not toward where I was standing. Not toward the water. But toward the hallway behind me. Like something stood there, invisible to me. But not to it. I dropped the glass. It shattered. I backed away, sliding along the counter until my shoulder hit the wall. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady myself just to breathe. And then, my shadow stepped closer to the hallway. I did not move. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a trick of the light. Shadows don't have preferences. They don't make choices. They don't look at things. Mine did. It began ignoring me. The next week, I started noticing the shadow behaving as if it had a schedule of its own. When I entered a room, sometimes it didn't come with me immediately. It lingered. Delay turned into defiance. When I stood still, it swayed. When I moved, it froze. When I worked at my desk, it paced behind me. But the worst part, the part that made my skin crawl every time, was how it kept staring toward the front door. Not at me. Not at the light. Always at the damn doorway. Waiting. For what? Or for who? The night it followed someone else. The moment that changed everything happened at 2:14 a.m. on a Saturday. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Soft. Slow. Too measured to be accidental. My building had thin walls, but these steps sounded like they belonged inside my own unit. I got out of bed. The lights were off. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. And then I saw it. A tall, thin silhouette walking past my bedroom door. Its outline just barely visible through the faint streetlight bleeding through the blinds. For a moment I thought it was a person. But then I realized something horrifying. Cast no shadow of its own. Instead, my shadow slid across the floor toward it. It stretched, elongated, detached itself from my feet like a spill of darkness being pulled by gravity. Pulled toward that figure. The silhouette didn't look at me, didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge that it was taking something from me. It simply walked through the hallway, turned the corner, and disappeared into my living room, my shadow following silently behind it. And then both were gone. My body refused to move for nearly a full minute. I wasn't alone in the apartment, and whatever was here wasn't human. 6. Living without a shadow. The next morning was worse. When the sun rose, I stepped outside onto my balcony, hoping the light would bring some sense of normalcy. But when I looked down, cast no shadow, not even a faint one. The sunlight hit my body, but the ground remained empty beneath me, like the world could no longer read me, like I wasn't fully here. Do you understand how terrifying it is to realize your own existence isn't reflected anywhere? My stomach twisted. I gripped the railing so hard my fingers went numb. Something had taken my shadow, and it didn't plan on giving it back. 7. Signs of the new bond. Over the next days, I started noticing strange changes in my apartment. Objects slightly moved, drawers half open, chairs angled toward the hallway, as if someone or something walked through the place at night, accompanied by a slithering, crawling dark stain along the floor. Sometimes, when I stood in the doorway of a dark room, I could feel the presence inside. Not loud, not violent, but aware, watching, breathing without lungs. And when I turned on the lights, the presence would vanish. But I would see, just for a second, the imprint of a shadow across the floor. A smear of darkness slithering away like it was guilty. It wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to something else. The night I saw its new master. It happened on a Thursday. I had barely slept for days, drifting between panic and exhaustion. Around 3:30 a.m., I got up to drink water. As I walked past the living room, the temperature dropped again, instantly, violently. I looked in, and froze. The figure was standing by my couch. Tall. Wrong. Its proportions subtly distorted, like a person stretched in places where bones shouldn't bend. His head tilted, a curious, predatory angle. But the worst part was beneath it. My shadow lay perfectly beneath its feet, matching its posture, mirroring its stance, obeying it. It was loyal now. The figure didn't move, didn't attack, didn't even approach me. Instead, it raised its hand. A slow, elegant motion, and my shadow followed. Not me. The figure then turned and stepped toward the hallway. As it moved, my shadow slipped after it, clinging to the floor like liquid night. They left together, leaving me hollow. The final realization. It has been 3 days since I've seen either of them. But now something is happening to me. When I walk, my footsteps make no sound. When I stand in sunlight, I feel cold instead of warm. When I speak, my voice feels thin, like it's falling apart on the edges. I think shadows aren't just reflections. I think they anchor us to this world, to ourselves, to being human. And without one, without mine,
I'm fading.
people on the street don't look at me anymore. Automatic doors don't open for me. My reflection in store windows looks washed out, almost transparent. And last night, lying in bed, I heard footsteps again. But this time, they sounded like my footsteps, because I think I'm the one following now. I think I'm the one being dragged toward someone else. My shadow found a new master, and now, my body is looking for one too. Story 2. The shadow that was never mine. I've always believed that losing your mind would feel dramatic, loud, chaotic, impossible to miss. But the truth is, it starts quietly, softly, a single wrong detail in a world that should be predictable. For me, that detail was my shadow. It began so subtly that I dismissed it the first dozen times. Shadows flicker, distort, get interrupted by light sources. They behave oddly when you're tired, or stressed, or when you haven't slept properly in weeks. At least that's what I told myself. But I'll never forget the exact moment when I stopped making excuses. The moment I realized my shadow wasn't following me anymore. It was following someone else. The first sign. A perfectly normal morning. It was a Wednesday. I remember that clearly because Wednesdays were my reset days. Coffee, a long shower, a quiet morning, and then work in front of my computer. Calm. Predictable. I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth. Sunlight from the window cast my shadow onto the wall. And it looked normal. Same shape, same outline, same movement, until I leaned forward to spit into the sink. That's when I saw it. A tiny, almost unnoticeable hesitation. I bent forward. My shadow stayed upright. For half a second. Then it snapped down to match me. I blinked. Stared. Did it really lag? Or was it just my reflection in the chrome faucet confusing me? I tested it. Lifted my hand. The shadow lifted too. Perfectly synchronized. I almost laughed at myself. But deep down, something cold settled beneath my ribs. I knew what I saw. The lag becomes independence. Over the next days, the hesitation kept happening. A second delay when I turned away. A slight misalignment when I reached for something. Sometimes it lowered its head before I did, as if anticipating my movement. I tried filming it on my phone, but every time I recorded, everything looked normal. No delay. No mismatch. No glitch. Just me. I convinced myself it was psychosomatic. Stress-induced perception distortion. Nothing more. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it acted out. One morning I walked past the narrow hallway between the kitchen and living room. The light hit me from the side, creating a long shadow on the wall. I stopped to tie my shoes. My shadow didn't stop. Kept walking. Just 2 steps. Barely noticeable. But enough to make my entire chest tighten. Enough to make my eyes water from the sudden drop in adrenaline. Enough to make me say out loud, in an empty apartment, "Stop messing with me." And I don't know what scared me more, the fact that I said it, or the fact that I genuinely expected it to respond. The doorway incident. A week later, things escalated. I was leaving the apartment, rushing because I was late. As I stepped through the doorway, I caught sight of my shadow stretching across the floor tiles behind me. Except it didn't step out with me. It stayed inside. I froze with 1 foot outside the door, 1 inside. Slowly, I turned my head toward the wall. My shadow stood fully in the apartment, facing the hallway. Facing inside, not toward me. My mouth went dry. A stupid fear flashed through my brain. If I stepped fully outside, would my shadow stay behind? I lifted my foot. My shadow didn't move. Only when I forced myself across the threshold did it finally slide out behind me, snapping back into place, perfectly aligned. Felt resentful. I know how insane that sounds, but that's the word that came to mind. Resentful. The stranger in my building. 2 nights later, things got worse. I came home late after buying groceries. The hallway was dimly lit, 1 bulb flickering, casting stretched shapes along the walls. I walked quietly, trying not to drop anything. Ahead of me, a silhouette turned the corner. A woman, I think. Slim. Long hair. Wearing a coat. Her walk was slow, deliberate. I didn't recognize her. And I knew every face in this building. But what paralyzed me wasn't her sudden appearance. It was what followed her. A shadow. Not hers. Mine. It moved behind her, matching her pace, not mine. Not flickering. Not distorted. My shadow followed her as if she were the source of light. As if she were the one casting it. My legs nearly gave out. I dropped the grocery bag. Eggs crashing, apples rolling across the floor, but I couldn't even look down. I just stared as the woman disappeared around the corner, my shadow trailing after her, with perfect obedience. Then, a second later, it snapped back to my feet like a rubber band being released. I gasped so loudly the neighbor's dog started barking behind a door. And that was the moment I broke. The therapist who tried to make sense of it. I made an emergency appointment the next morning. My therapist, Dr. Howell, listened politely as I explained everything. Every hesitation, every movement, every glitch. When I told her about my shadow following someone else, she didn't laugh. She didn't judge. She simply leaned back and said, "That sounds incredibly frightening. But can I ask, have you been sleeping?" I told her the truth. Barely. Nightmares. Sleeplessness. Constant, heavy fog behind my eyes. She nodded sympathetically. Prolonged sleep deprivation can cause perceptual anomalies. Shadows, auditory distortions, even mild hallucinations. Hallucinations. The word echoed in my skull. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted it to be just that. Something explainable. Fixable. But what I saw wasn't a trick of the mind. I wasn't imagining the footsteps I heard at night. The light switch flipping on by itself. The dark shape in the hallway that froze the moment I looked at it. That wasn't stress. That wasn't sleep deprivation. That wasn't me misreading my environment. My shadow was behaving independently, and I knew it. The night I tested it. I needed proof, so I set up a test. I positioned myself directly under the living room lamp, one bright, central light source. I stood still, staring at my shadow, waiting for it to misbehave. Moments passed. Nothing. 5 minutes. Nothing. Then, I moved my right hand slightly. My shadow didn't move. I moved it higher. Still no reaction. My pulse started pounding. I raised my hand all the way up, and my shadow slowly, deliberately, lifted its left hand, as if mirroring someone else entirely. I stumbled back, hitting the couch. My breath came out ragged and sharp. My hands trembled. I whispered, "Whose movements are you copying?" The shadow lowered its hand before I did. I felt something break inside me. This wasn't hallucination. Hallucinations don't coordinate with precision. Hallucinations don't lag. Hallucinations don't choose the person it was following. That night, I slept on the couch with the lamp on. Around 4:20 a.m., I woke up to the faint sound of footsteps above me. Except, there was no upstairs. I lived on the top floor. The footsteps were inside my apartment. Slow, heavy, purposeful. I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was dark, but a silhouette stood at the end of it. Tall one, unmoving, watching me, and beneath it, a shadow stretched along the floor. My shadow, at its feet. My throat tightened. Couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, couldn't even blink. The figure took one step toward me. My shadow slid across the carpet. Another step. Another stretch of blackness following its heels. I whispered, barely audible, "Please, stop." The figure froze, then slowly turned away, not toward me but toward the doorway, and my shadow followed. Not me, followed them. The final break. I didn't move until morning. When sunlight hit the room, the figure was gone. But the shadow near my feet didn't appear right away. Crawled back slowly, late, reluctant, as if returning to something it didn't belong to anymore. As if I was just a placeholder. As if I wasn't the one it wanted. I think I know what's happening now. It wasn't copying someone else. It wasn't lagging behind me. My shadow was practicing, preparing, learning how to follow another shape. Because it wasn't mine anymore. It never was. I was just borrowing it. And now it's going back to its real owner. Story 3. The shadow that wasn't mine anymore. I used to think shadows were the safest parts of the world. Flat, predictable, harmless. A shadow only moves when you move. A shadow only exists because you exist. A shadow never acts on its own. That, at least, is what I believed before the night mind detached from me. It started with something so small I almost ignored it. For a week, whenever I walked through the hallway, I kept thinking I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Just a flicker, just a shift, like someone else's silhouette ducking out of frame. But every time I looked directly, it was just my shadow on the wall. Or at least, something shaped like it. The first real warning came on a Tuesday. I was walking past the mirror near the entrance when I noticed something off. My reflection matched me perfectly, but the shadow on the floor behind me leaned a little to the left. I straightened my shoulders, shifted weight. My reflection copied me exactly. The shadow did not. It stayed tilted, like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. I told myself it was a lighting trick. My brain messing with me. Fatigue. Whatever excuse made me feel less insane in the moment. But excuses don't help when you wake up in the middle of the night because you hear your own footsteps walking away from your bed. Not toward the hall. Away. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was dark, silent, untouched. But on the opposite wall, illuminated faintly by the streetlights bleeding through the blinds, was a silhouette. My silhouette, standing, still, as if it had been there for hours. I looked down. My body wasn't moving. My arms were at my sides, legs under the blanket. But the shadow on the wall, the one shaped like me, it wasn't mirroring anything I was doing. It was just staring. The next morning I convinced myself I dreamed it. A hallucination, maybe, but the truth started cracking when other people noticed something too. At work a colleague said, "You feeling all right? Your posture looked weird yesterday. Like your shadow was leaning backward while you were leaning forward." He laughed. I didn't. But the real breaking point happened 3 nights later. I woke up again. Same faint streetlight glow. Same quiet room. But the shadow wasn't on the wall this time. It was sitting on the edge of my bed. It wasn't a hallucination. My blanket sank slightly, exactly where the shadow's weight would be if it were real. I froze, too terrified to breathe. His head turned toward me slowly, and when it lifted what should have been its hand, a thin ripple of cold went through the air, brushing across my arm. The touch felt real, as cold, intentional. That's when the whisper came. Not loud, not threatening, more like something trying to sound gentle but failing because its voice wasn't designed for speaking. You finally noticed. I jerked away, scrambling back across the bed. The shadow didn't follow. Instead, it rose. But it didn't rise like a figure standing up. It rose like smoke poured upward from a fire, stretching, twisting, drawing itself into a human shape only because that shape used to belong to me. I staggered onto the floor, backing up toward the wall. What do you want? I whispered. The shadow tilted its head at me, and I swear I saw 2 darker patches where its eyes should be. Not you. Its voice curled around the room. I was waiting for him. Who? I asked. The shadow didn't answer. It turned its head toward the hallway. And then, someone else stepped into view. At least, that's what my mind tried to process because the figure had the outline of a man, but there were no features. No color. No texture. Just a completely hollow shape, darker than darkness itself. A void. And it moved with a fluid confidence that made my stomach drop. The shadow on the bed, the one shaped like me, shifted, bending slightly like it was kneeling to greet someone higher. The faceless figure stepped closer, and the temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged the air. Then it spoke. Not in a whisper. Not in words. In thought. A heavy pressure pressed into my skull, like someone's consciousness was forcing itself through a crack in mine. You held on to him too long, the figure said. Not with sound, but directly inside my mind. He was ours before he was ever yours. My knees gave out. I clutched my head, trying to push the voice out. What are you talking about? I don't even know you. But the figure stepped closer, and as it did, every shadow in the room stretched toward it, like metal filings drawn to a magnet. My shadow, the one that was no longer mine, slowly peeled off the wall, slithering across the floor to join the thing standing in the doorway. And then it hit me. I wasn't losing my shadow. It was returning to someone else. The figure extended an arm, and my shadow folded into it, absorbed into its body like ink spilling into water. My body suddenly felt lighter, wrongly lighter, like something vital had been cut loose. I tried to run. I tried to scream. But before I could move, the figure leaned close until its presence pressed against my mind like a weight. He will follow the one who wears him. Then the figure stepped back into the corridor. My shadow, my former shadow, turned once, as if acknowledging me, then followed the figure down the hall. In seconds, both were gone. The room warmed. The air loosened. The shadows returned to normal. Except for one detail. When I finally found the courage to look behind me, the wall behind my body was completely bare. No silhouette. No outline. Nothing. I stood up, moving my arms, waving my hands in front of the dim light. No shadow appeared. Anywhere. And then, the real horror hit. It wasn't that my shadow left me. It was that I was never supposed to have one. Someone else's shadow had been attached to me for years. Maybe since childhood. Maybe longer. And now it had gone back to the one it belonged to. But the last words still echo in my mind. He will follow the one who wears him. Which means, the figure, whatever it was, now wears my shadow. And somewhere out there, in the dark, is following someone else.